Welcome to That's What I Call Marketing, the podcast where you'll hear from the leading lights in the marketing world and listen to their unique insights. Well, we are back with our singles episodes. These are our shorter episodes where I speak to experts about the hot topics in marketing and get their perspective. But it's not just their perspectives, because these episodes are being brought to you and powered by Tracksuit data. Now, of course, Tracksuit is the radically affordable, always-on brand tracking dashboard that will help you measure and communicate the value of your brand building activities. Of course, Tracksuit was built by marketers for marketers, and it helps bring brand building to the board table and increases the visibility of marketing in those really important board conversations. The problem is, lots of us can't afford to pay the hundreds of thousands or more for brand tracking. It just makes it out of the question for so many of us. So Tracksuit has come along, completely disrupting the market, bringing us enterprise level brand tracking without the same price tag. Its data is easy to understand for both marketers and non-marketers and helps create that common language for companies to measure and communicate the value of the brand. So check out gotracksuit.com for more. And in today's episode, we are going to be talking about the brand map of Britain. We're going to be talking about chocolate, and we are going to be talking about airlines. So let's get right into it with Dan and Jasper from Tracksuit. Dan, Jasper, thanks a million for joining me on the singles. Great to see you both.
Great to see you, Conor.
Good to see you.
We've a lot to cover. Of course, the big news coming out of That's What I Call Marketing is that we've launched the That's What I Call Marketing, the musical, featuring some A-listers of marketing. We've got Mark Ritson as the grumpy professor. It's going to be seen in the West End only on April 1st. Sorry, April 1st. Listen, I saw the brand map of Britain. This was fascinating stuff. I'd love you guys to tell me a bit about the brand map of Britain. You went out and spoke to 6,000 Brits and asked them, well, what did you ask them? And then what came back?
Yeah, absolutely. So the brand map of Britain report essentially captures the power of preference, and it dives into how local emotional connections shape long-term brand preference almost. And the report itself acts as a blueprint, essentially, of British regional preferences. So to your point, we went out and surveyed over 6,000 UK consumers. And what we looked to capture that across was across 5 key categories. So we charted that across supermarkets, fast food, tea, biscuits, and beer. And really, we came away with some really interesting findings across each of the categories, and we'll talk to some of those shortly. But really what those sort of summarized analysis essentially was around how one size doesn't fit all. And the fact that, within our data, we capture there's a real possibility of winning in certain regions. If a brand taps into the local psyche and consciousness of those relative demographics, that consumer loyalty is real. So we found that the average loyalty rate, for example, for an FMCG brand, is around 13%, and that local brand loyalty matters. So those were sort of some of our key findings from the report itself.
And it's kind of, I would have thought, and this comes through, is that it would have been maybe like generational, like that your parents, let's say, drank a certain brand of tea, and then that just passes down through the generations. I know, like here in Ireland, there's kind of the battle of the 2 tea brands, Lyons Tea and Barry's Tea. And like particularly Barry's actually really play into that generational piece of, the parents sending over the tea bags to the daughter that's overseas. And, so they really play into that. But you found that while that may have an impact, there's other factors at play with stuff like tea.
Yeah, completely. I mean, firstly, Conor, I'd love to know, out of that battle, where do you sit on the team?
Well, Lyons Tea. Sorry, Barry. All the way. Yeah. I mean, my mum, she drank Lyons Tea. Yeah.
I think that there's still like absolutely a generational component, and we found such high loyalty around like half of the population found that there was like a strong daily routine or ritual that led to this preference within tea. And so I think it is this idea of like, there is absolutely like generational, like how, like what did you do when you were at home, when you grew up? But then equally for brands to think about like, how do they build preference from a regional perspective, and understanding that there is this generational movement and preference. How do you think about that as well regionally? I mean, Yorkshire Tea is the brilliant example of this, who just were the out and out leader, the undisputed national champ, as we were calling them in the report. But they had 24% preference nationally. And then you could see in their hometown of Yorkshire that jumped 42%. And teas are actually a really good example because it goes hand in hand with this whole biscuits ritual side of things. So do you drink your tea with a digestive or do you drink it with a shortbread? And again, like coming back to what is that ritual and what have you grown up with? I mean, one thing that didn't come out of the report is Jasper's preferences and how he interacts with his tea. Does he go milk first or milk last?
I mean, it's milk last.
It is milk last.
There is no debate to that, surely.
Oh, 100% it's milk last.
So
in the same way, you wouldn't put milk in before the cereal. I can argue the same.
Yeah.
No, I would agree, unless I'm heating the milk up in the microwave. Then the milk has to be in first and heated, because otherwise the cereal goes soggy. These are really important big brand questions.
So good. But I mean, I was one thing I would say about how to like interpret this report for brands is that preference, especially for these larger brands, is something that you have the luxury to fight over. How do you fight for customer loyalty based on your audiences? But then understanding from a challenger brand perspective that you probably don't have that luxury to be fighting for preference yet. You don't have the heritage, the time in market, the brand size, and it's actually about building awareness and consideration. So the lens here is how have these really large scale brands been able to build customer loyalty at a regional basis and understand like where are they winning and losing, and then how to start to think about how do you feed into local cultures and that type of thing to really heighten that preference across the UK, for instance.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, Conor. I was just going to quickly build on Dan's point, I think, as well, with Yorkshire Tea specifically and with regards to their advertising and branding. I think what they've done fantastically is they've obviously channeled that Yorkshire heritage, but at a national level, and they've really kind of leaned into the proper good, proper brew, the real sort of Yorkshire spirit, and in a way channeling everybody's inner Yorkshire side with regards to the brand, and really got everybody to sort of lean into it. So I think that's also an example of a brand that is almost doubled down on its regionality and its birthplace and where it's from, but at a national scale.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was about to talk about. Like, it's a phenomenal growth story as well, because I think they were third in the market. And again, you look at this, and like concepts like loyalty are, within marketing, there's certainly in a lot of categories there is just no loyalty. And obviously Ehrenberg Bass talk about, even you have that famous graph where the long tail of Coca-Cola drinkers, but it's just really interesting that there is kind of a sense of a degree of loyalty to these brands. But they were number 3, and some wonderful work that some of the other brands did through the years. And I know, like, Professor Kuhn Powell's had talked to me about advertising is the weak force, and I get that, but actually Yorkshire Tea really leaned into a great insight, great advertising, like fame as a strategies, like Paul Feldman would talk about, and consistency over so many years, and have become number 1. It's phenomenal.
It's an exceptional story. And I mean, one of the phenomenal campaigns that they've just been running back and back and back again is the where everything's done proper, to lean into that Lucky Generals piece around pulling in Sarah Lancashire to do the Yorkshire Tea security guard was such an incredible, fun campaign that really lent back into this idea of how do you drive home quality local. And we saw this through the brand perceptions that were coming through. Like, they were absolutely shooting the lights out on traditional high quality local, and they did it in their way with that like regional heritage piece coming through in that campaign, which was really cool.
One of the other brands that popped out in the work was McVitie's as well, and I find that really interesting because, like, I'm sure they've come out with some really kind of some nice work in the last couple of years. It's kind of really big, a lot of out of home, like big, beautiful product shots. People will say that's not advertising. I disagree. Really leaning into the quality of their products, because I guess they're under pressure from own label. I can go into a discount store and buy a version of a digestive for a third of the price. So that's you can see where they're going with that, and obviously trying to build the brand and build that equity so they can have that price premium that people are going to be willing to pay. So it's I was interested to see them coming through as quite a strong brand as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, within the biscuit category, they are the clear standout when it comes to preference. And as we say in the report, if it was the biscuit Oscars, McVitie's achieved a clean sweep. So, yeah, I mean, to your point in terms of, I think, the work and how as a brand they've showed up with regards to their advertising. I mean, they launched a campaign, back in 2020 titled The Nation's Favourite Biscuit.
Yes.
And through the work of TBWA London over the last few years, they've continued to champion the product in their advertising, as you've mentioned, from the More Than a Biscuit campaign to the True Originals work, where they brought in Trevor McDonald as the the key figure within the work, really kind of claiming the crown really as the true original. And what we've seen within the data at a national level is they lead with a 20% preference nationally.
It's incredible. And then I know you'd food psychologist. Amazing. What a great job. Food psychologist Professor Charles Spence was involved. And what was really interesting, he was talking about the distinctiveness of packaging and how that can really help. I guess, look, I guess it makes a lot of sense. You're in a very busy supermarket. You need that distinctiveness in the packaging. And again, we look at some of the own label discount retailers that have very similar, a lot of colors. So, it's really important for these brands to think about that distinctiveness.
Yeah, completely. And I think to your point in terms of it's the distinctiveness of how they're showing up, in person, in the aisles, in physical spaces, but equally how they then execute and carry through at a product level. And ultimately preference is driven through product, right? It's not necessarily driven through the advertising of it as well. So the fact that they've got this sort of holistic viewpoint of the brand as an all-in-one sort of encompassed view of making sure the product still stays at a premium level, but then that's continued to be executed as and where they're showing up as well, just sort of really drives that instinctiveness.
Yeah, well, listen, great report. People can go to gotracksuit.com and they'll be able to download the report, if I am correct. I guess I am, but let's just double check that with the experts.
Yeah, absolutely. Jump in, download the report. Let us know what you think. Dispute if some of those preferences that you think are out of whack. But yeah, we'd love to get opinion and people's thoughts on it all.
Yeah. And is there a footnote on Jasper's tea making? Listen, let's move on. We want to talk about chocolate. Obviously, this time of year, chocolate is top of mind for lots of people. You can't go into a supermarket without falling over boxes of Easter eggs, and the temptation to just like buy and eat continuously is there. As a chocolate lover, I find it really disturbing. And I think I probably have a preferred. It's really interesting. I was thinking about this. I was like, yeah, I definitely have a preferred chocolate. And then I was like, oh, I probably don't, because I just like them all. But Galaxy is one of the chocolates that I love. I used to be really fond. This is terrible. I used to have a real Galaxy caramel bar and a can of Diet Coke, and I would have multiple of them in a day. So it's amazing I'm not a different size. But things are going well for Galaxy.
Yeah, I mean, amazing results for Galaxy at the moment. And I mean, chocolate's probably going to dominate the conversation for the next few weeks. Arguably, Easter should just be a year-long conversation. Before diving into Galaxy, I mean, my personal preference is love a Tony's Chocolonely. Yeah. So hard to beat. I'd be dipping that in with a coffee personally, so I'll break all chocolate digestive tea conversation. But yeah, I mean, jumping into chocolate as a category as a whole, like growing throughout the board, I think Galaxy is particularly a standout just from our data, from seeing full funnel growth across the board. So the data that we were looking at was from September 2024 through to February this year. And we can see for a brand as large as Galaxy, where its starting awareness is sitting at 90%, for them to be able to grow that to 92% the last 5 months is quite extraordinary. And then consideration growing 3% from 65% to 68%. And coming back to the theme of the conversation led from brand map is preference, which we know is the hardest metric to move at the bottom of the funnel. And they've grown that from 11% to 15%. And so I think what's quite interesting for a brand of this size is like, what are the associations that are really driving that funnel conversion? And what's coming through for Galaxy is it's all around relatability. It's all around trust. So within a category where people do have, taste as product. People have their preferences. To be leaning on relatability and trust is really going to show that that marketing engine is really working quite neatly.
Yeah, I mean, those metrics you say, like when you're at those levels of yes, awareness, to be able to even move anything at that at that
Yeah.
stage is great. But as you say, getting that preference up in like let's be real, it's a really competitive space and category, and it's the one where you need that preference to be there, because when you're faced with that array of chocolate bars, you want people to reach for yours, right? And there's such a variety and such a such a choice, and you're right, taste comes into it. Yeah, Cadbury's goes great with a glass of milk, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, no. And then
So
I mean the other fascinating piece is like, how do you compete as a challenger brand in a category that is so dominated by these absolute chocolate power players? And I think that's where Tony's Chocolonely does, as they always get brought into the conversation just because they're such a distinctive brand. They have such a strong brand purpose. And I think for them, what we're starting to see is that although Galaxy and the category captains are leading on trust and relatability, is how they're starting to move the needle on like is on the way up, is really stands for something. And why in the topic like the context of chocolate as a category is so interesting is they're so at risk and volatile to the movement of input prices like cocoa prices.
yeah,
For Tony's Chocolonely to have such a tight following of consumers, for them to be able to be transparent, to pass through cost increases, to pass through pricing hikes, I think that for them, they're going after very different associations. So still obviously taste, product is there, but it's how do they compete for that purpose piece where brand purpose gets thrown around quite loosely, but they absolutely live and breathe who they are and what they stand for.
yeah. I think that's the difference with brand purpose. I agree with you. Like brand purpose gets thrown around, and everyone's just like, yawn, boring, and But Tony started out with a purpose, and so I just think that's a very different thing, because it started out with the purpose to do something, and in a way, like the product became a vehicle for that to happen. To kind of create fairness, equity, and pay farmers the right amount. And they constantly lean into that, and they constantly challenge the category leaders and call them out. Like in some of the work, like they're very direct in how they call out the big players and say, you're not doing this. And they've been very open as well about sharing the methods the things they do to make it happen. They're like, we will share with you the way that you can do this and pay people fairly.
Completely. I mean, to touch on both of those points, like their most recent call out to Cadbury in their Made to Share campaign, where they've split up the Cadbury block into like who booked the flights, who booked the hotel, who got to enjoy the holiday. And then Tony's coming out and kind of spinning up in the most beautifully reactive campaign around bringing to light the ethics of like how does sourcing work. I think that they actually have the credibility to be able to be that sharp in how they respond to their competitors. And then to touch on the Tony's open chain, this is probably going to be one of the stranger comparison points, but it feels like it's a play out of the Tesla playbook, where I feel like back when Tesla was getting going, essentially starting the EV category, and really needed competitors to build EV infrastructure to get behind the category for it to grow. They really open sourced like a lot of their innovation to other car makers. And it's quite similar with Tony's right now, is essentially they're opening up their supply chain to competitors like Feastables in the US, because they are so bought into the brand purpose of like, how do we change this category, that they're willing to turbocharge competitors to essentially improve the category as a whole. So yeah, I mean, they are so well celebrated, as they should be.
Yeah, definitely. And, their work is good. Like their packaging is great. There's so much. I think to call out Cadbury's, I do like what they've done with the bar. I think it was a really clever use of the packaging, and they often do nice things, so it is a great brand, and they do some great work. I don't get their virtual hide the egg thing though. Myself and my wife had pretty much an argument about this the other day. I was like, why would I go on and I had a virtual egg somewhere, and and it'd be some random place, and she goes, because it has some meaning. I'm like, I have to figure that out. Nah, you're fine. There's no reward. I don't get an egg at the end of it. So no, I'm out. I'm out on that
I
one.
think it's pretty cool experimentation for a brand of that size to be going down that path. But yeah,
Sure.
Something different.
And randomly, we'll finish off with this one with the chocolate category. Those Dubai chocolate bars that people are buying for like €100 or pounds or whatever. Like it's crazy stuff. I have a friend coming over from Dubai this weekend, and he was asking us, did we want him to bring some over? And I'm just like, no, you're grand.
I'm all good.
I'm fine.
If you're going to pay for them, sure.
Yeah. That's the prime of chocolate bars, I think.
Secondary market for Dubai.
Yeah. Well, listen, let's move on. It's again that time of year where lots of people are sitting down thinking, okay, we need some heat in our bones. We need to start booking flights and getting out of these countries that we live in, and particularly in the UK and Ireland. We're just like, oh my God, I can't do this anymore. And some really interesting stats coming through on British Airways. Jasper, tell us a bit about how things are going for them.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I first just wanted for BA to nod to Uncommon's work. So their British original campaign for BA has been exceptional, and of course was recognised with the Outdoor Grand Prix at Cannes in 2023. And really, the thing about the work is that it focuses on emotional storytelling, and it really kind of taps into that deeply personal kind of connection as to why people travel, which, really kind of moves the consumer beyond just the destination into the journey itself. And, that evokes feelings of nostalgia, anticipation, and human connection. I read a fantastic quote actually from the BA Chief Customer Officer, who said that the campaign's all about celebrating our amazing colleagues and showing how original journeys can help shape your future in life. And of course, emotional advertising was a topic we briefly touched on last week.
Yep.
We spoke to the sort of powerful driver it has of brand connection. And at Tracksuit, we explored this in the Emotion Effect report that we launched last year, which essentially found that ads that trigger happiness or excitement are 27% more likely to be shared and drive brand fame. Also, emotional ads boost a brand's price premium by up to 40%, so making consumers more willing to pay more.
Yeah.
And where this has become interesting for BA is that our data set captured from having surveyed over 3,500 UK consumers active in the international airlines category highlighted a few key verbatim themes decided to pull through. So those being reputation and heritage. So the brand seen as established, iconic, and having a strong national identity. It's also perceived as expensive, but delivering a high quality service. So suggesting its higher price is justified by the overall experience and brand quality. And really, again, to that point of correlating that with the power of emotional advertising, kind of demonstrating how effective creative work drives both brand perception and business impact. And with regards to the actual data set itself that we've seen, their brand funnel performance between September last year through to February this year, we saw stability across their awareness and claimed usage. So awareness remained at 97%, again, incredibly high within the category. Yeah. And claims usage increased by a percentage point from 78 to 79%. However, where we saw significant increases were in the mid to lower funnel metrics. So their consideration was up from 83 to 87%. Investigation was up 2 percentage points from 76 to 78. And preference was also up by 5 percentage points, from 57 to 62. And then just at sort of a broader funnel conversion performance, we're seeing a very strong top of funnel conversion rate of 89%. And then 69% of those who do consider the brand ultimately go on to express their preference. Yeah,
it's an incredible story. I mean, to be fair, I think as a brand, it was in trouble. Like, in the last maybe 5-10 years, it had gone through a bad patch. It had gone through really poor, I think, customer experiences. And I think, I don't know enough about it, but my perception from the outside looking in, which that's a consumer, is they went and fixed a lot of that stuff before they started fixing and doing new advertising. Do you know what I mean? They didn't come out with advertising first.
Yeah, completely. And I think what they've done brilliantly actually is really continue to hero that originality, but throughout every step of the customer journey. So to your point about it not necessarily just being an advertising push, the touch points included their onboarding safety video, to the menu, which has a focus on British provenance and British originality, and just really touching on those uniquely British elements on the ground as well as in the air. So almost ensuring that brand truth and that brand promise lived and was present at every stage of the customer journey, and to your point, beyond just what we're seeing executed at an advertising level.
One of the great things, again, I think with their advertising, and I think I was saying this, that I saw a thing maybe last year. It was around the Cannes Young Line competition, and somebody from Cannes just showed a reel of airline ads, and they just stitched them together. I haven't been able to get my hands on it. I really want to. They just stitched them all together in a sequence, and they were all the same. It was all these moments of, air stewards, going around, and the child dropping the teddy, and they pick it up and they put the blanket over the person, and they turn the light off gently, and all this kind of stuff. And it was so just the category norm, right? And
Yeah.
I think BA have done a great job of actually not going there. And even, the work they did last year at the out of home with like just the bit of the logo and the window seat, and you're just like, oh wow, they leaned into, I think, brave. I hate that word, but like they knew that they had that heritage, and they were able to kind of go there with it, as opposed to just doing real category orthodoxies, and becomes wallpaper.
Yeah, completely. I mean, that out of home that they launched last year was, in my opinion, just an absolute masterclass. Because I think what it also touched on was the power of brand, where you have an out of home shot that doesn't include the logo, doesn't even necessarily include the branding, but you knew exactly who the brand was just from that sort of bottom corner section. And it was phenomenal. And I mean, even that out of home advertising I was enjoying on the way home last night, which is, I don't know if you've seen their latest work, but it's the gargoyles sort of all around the tube, touching on sort of those different emotive points. So it's fantastic.
It's great.
It also just brings back to the point of they're just evoking emotion as opposed to needing to push home a story or push home a point. It's for that out of home campaign where it was travel, leisure, and then it was just like, to your point earlier, Conor, just going to get some sun, or having like the boarding ticket that was wet and the out of home like design. I think it's just like making people stop and really connect emotionally back to that campaign, as opposed to hammer home a specific message.
Which, there's airlines out there that will do that, and they're blue and yellow, and they, the price point is £19, and then you go on, you end up spending like 250 by the time you buy a seat and get access to the toilets. So, speaking of that, there was a very funny thing, and I don't know if it was true, but I'm not saying it's the same airline, but Michael Leary, who's the CEO of Ryanair, who just happened to be blue and yellow as well, and was in a restaurant in Ireland, and I saw a picture, and again, I don't know if this is true, but I really hope it is, where the bill came over and they like added stuff like, seat close to the window and access to the toilet, and like, put massive charges on his bill for it. And I'm just like, I really hope that was true.
I saw that. That was brilliant. I really hope that bill blew out. And I hope the chair that they put them in was the most like tight, like zero cushion, and then someone sitting next to you eating a packet of chips pretty much over your shoulder from a recent experience from a flight back from Poland. But that is good. But it is interesting though that how within the airline category, when we just like compare it to chocolate, the conversation around brand is purely around customer experience and how many more touch points you have with the customer versus a Finnish Chocolonely that has to pretty much lean into like the product to begin with, but you just have such fewer touch points category to category there.
Yeah, that's such a great point. And then it becomes like it's harder for both probably, but like for the airline, you go, there's more moments for that to go wrong. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, and I think it just comes back to that point, doesn't it? I think really for brands to ensure that where they're not just again executing, but really kind of living their true values is through every stage of the customer journey, because ultimately that is what shapes a consumer's experience. And ultimately, if we're looking at it from a funnel perspective and driving consumers through the funnel, it ultimately is going to be those interactions and those experiences that really do determine if a consumer story is going to be returning to a brand through a positive experience or not.
Yeah, and you can have those high awareness levels, but you need that. You need the preference, you know, like you need people to go, no, that is the one I prefer.
And then also relating your pricing and positioning back to what consumer expectations will be. So you can be absolutely comfortable with maybe less comfortable seats and tight setup because that is actually what you're paying for and that is what you're subscribing to versus setting the bar high, charging pricing, like having that price premium. So just like leveling expectations, because I think consumers respond to what they're setting them, like what they're expecting from a brand anyway. So yeah, I think that even though that was probably a harsh comment, I absolutely still fly both based on expectations of what I'm looking for.
Yeah. Yeah. I think we all have to, you know, we want certain things, but then when it comes, we're like, actually, I can't afford that. So now I know I need to manage my own expectation for what this experience is going to be and not get angry.
Not see you again next time I fly.
I'll bring my own kids. Well, listen, guys, thanks a million for that. Some really great, you know, insights into things that are top of mind for people at the moment, particularly around, you know, Easter and chocolate heaven, and that's the only type of heaven, I think, and summer holidays and airlines. And again, the brand map of Britain, people can go to gotracksuit.com and download a copy of that. And yeah, again, look, if people haven't checked out the platform yet, that's a good opportunity to get an insight into what the power of Tracksuit is all about. Great. Well, listen, we will catch you in a couple of weeks, and yeah, really enjoyed chatting to you again.
Thanks, Conor.
Cheers, guys. Well, I hope you enjoyed that episode of The Singles, and we'll be back in a couple of weeks with another episode of The Singles. So do get in touch. I'm on LinkedIn. You can find me under my own name, Conor Byrne, or That's What I Call Marketing. Send us a message and let us know if there are things that you'd like us to look into with Tracksuit data. It's incredibly powerful data, as you can see and hear from these episodes. I was fascinated by the brand map of Britain, and I spoke to Dom Dwight from Yorkshire Tea at the start of season 3. He kicked off season 3. You can go back and listen to that episode. It's a fascinating story of growth from the brand, and they really used fame to drive their growth. Thanks again to Tracksuit for their partnership of this episode. They are, of course, the radically affordable, always on brand tracking dashboard. And you can find out more by visiting gotracksuit.com. And the team are ready, standing by and waiting for you to get in touch. And they will walk you through the dashboard, show you the power of the dashboard, show you the power of having always on brand tracking. The days of having to do once a year dip for consumer brands is gone. Go to gotracksuit.com. That's it for me, your host, Conor Byrne. Thanks again to Dan and Jasper for joining me on this episode of The Singles, and we'll be back next week with another episode of your regular broadcasting of That's What I Call Marketing. Fantastic guest coming your way. As always, thank you so much for tuning in. And if you like this episode, can subscribe, share, all of the good stuff that we know works and helps us on social. Please do, as it really helps grow our audience. Again, thank you so much. Until the next episode, from me, your host, Conor Byrne, take care.